Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome here at our, what will it be? Number 95, if I'm right. Wow, getting to the 100. Well, you might know me, Luc van Vugt. I'm the moderator today to the session, What About Modular Monoliths in AL? Christian Bräunlich is the speaker of the day today, and well, a new, as I called it in my retweet, a new kid on the block, a new speaker for Areopa. I'm very pleased that you picked up, or actually you offered to do this, Christian. Yeah, it's not always easy to step in as such. It brings some pressure, stress, or whatever. But I have all respect that you do, and especially with a topic that you have been struggling with, investigating in, and I'm very curious what will get handed over to today by you. But before I'm going to hand over to you, Christian, I'm going to through a couple of slides. And by the way, I shouldn't forget to mention Christian was in one of my test automation online courses. And I must say I was very pleased to have him on the course. We had some good discussions due to that. So that was our first meeting. I'll leave it to you to give a little bit more background on yourself. But as said before, I'm going to hand over. Let's move through the standard slides, especially for those who are here, might be here the first time. Your microphone is muted, and we leave it muted unless, well, we could unmute it, but if you want to pose questions, use the question window, and I'm going to pick it up. Christian and I agreed that if it makes sense to pose the question at that point directly to get clarification on what he's discussing, I will. And otherwise, there will be more logical points in between, moving from one agenda point to the other, or at the end. Yeah, so be more than welcome to, in that sense, be interactive, and let's see what comes from it. As you know, we do record it, it is running, and it will probably processed somewhere this evening. I'm very fortunate that we have 3 other guys that stepped in since last summer to help with the processing. This evening somebody else will process it, so I'm not fully aware when that will happen, but somewhere this evening, or maybe at the latest somewhere tomorrow morning, the recording of today will be online. If you are not yet subscribed to our newsletter, use this short URL. You've got a little bit time to more or less maybe make a screenshot, and probably most of you are already subscribed to it, but feel free to share this with others that also want to get the newsletter, which will be sent out, well, somewhere this week, maybe at the start of next week, because we do have a couple of more sessions scheduled, or are busy scheduling it. Today, I could have removed that one. I forgot that one. We do have the session by Christian. In 2 weeks' time, Christian Lenz will have a session on elastic leadership. I'm very pleased he stepped in with that also. Then I've forgotten that to mention for the December 2 that it's moved from what was it, the 28th of October. It was a bit too busy for me last month, and so we decided to move the session that Bert and I am going to give about the page scripting tool. On December 9 we'll have a session by Arthur and Tobias on grabbing artifacts in pipelines, and then this one was already mentioned but was not yet fully scheduled on the 6th of January by Arthur and Stefan Marron. Why should I use a custom code analyzer? It was projected for September, but Arthur decided to propose it as a session for direction, and it was accepted. So he first wanted to, let's say, perform it out there, and is going to rerun it for us, and we will record it on the 6th of January. And a fully new one on the 20th of January is by Bartosz Rudzinski, a session he did on one of the Days of Knowledge sessions in the previous season, and we're also pleased to have him on. We're working on some more, so the list will grow, but you are always welcome, invited to come up with whatever you think. Maybe an own session like Christian did, or a suggestion for a topic, and you might also have some thoughts on a speaker. So be welcome to do that. Well, then I'm at the end of my introduction, and that's always the point where I'm going to hand off to the speaker. But before I do, I want to thank Fornaf for enabling us to do this. So, Christian, I'm going to make you presenter, which means that you should be able, yeah, and you do share your screen. It's nicely in view. And now your sound, probably, it's there.
Yeah. No, it's perfectly fine. I was just waiting for some sort of transformation there.
Yeah.
All right, I'm ready to go. You can see my screen.
Yeah, the floor is yours, and I will mute my mic and step in where needed. So have fun.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you very much for the welcoming introduction there, Luc. Today's session is about the question, what about modular monoliths in AL? And I'd like to start with, yeah, basically the intention of today's session, the reasoning why I submitted this. It's because not a long time ago in runtime version 13, we were introduced with the possibility to finally extend the objects in one and the same app even multiple times. So this is leading to a better separation of concerns. And whether or not you're having some sort of history on the AL development, or even CAL, I'd like to mention, this is probably very beneficial, as it's leading it to a more modular design. But we will get there very shortly after a brief introduction of myself. I'm Christian Bräunlich. I'm 29. I'm from Flensburg, Germany. And my favorite chess openings are with the white pieces, the Smith-Morra Gambit, also known as the Morra, and the black pieces, the Caro-Kann, the more positional kind of opening there. I really love it. So up to today's agenda, we start with a short recap of why are we here? Why can we do this? Why couldn't it be done before? And then we will go into an introduction of what we just saw there, because I did not touch it in depth, what was written there in the changelog. I thought it would be more sophisticated if we just look at it in the pictures. Then we go into some sort of terminology, if these are even applicable to what we have in the AL framework. And then some tools, which are also like around for some times. And something that is probably a bit similar to the modular monolith approach would be if we rethink or think about the source control. There's some sort of difference between what we might think it is. So the monorepo and the monolith. And then something that is also causing my attention, it's the possibility to enable a package manager for AL. We'll also briefly touch that, and if that is helping us sorting out some of the dependency management for AL apps. And last but not least, moving fields. That is also going to be very challenging for us if we keep up with all the moving parts and basically move fields, tables, objects, whatever that might be around some apps. All right, so let's get started with a short recap. It's something I picked up from one of the BC Tech Days sessions on the Mybuso YouTube channel. And it goes the following. As you might have noticed, these are separated tables on the database. And for each and every app, or I should really say table extension, there's a new table on the database. This leads to performance issues, and yes, we were introduced with some ways of handling it, like the set load fields. And then we were given the companion table. So instead of like multiple joins on the SQL query, we'll end up with only one additional one join there. for each and every table extension throughout our multiple apps. And what Microsoft now introduced as of version runtime 13, it is possible to do it in various ways. One of which is having one base table, let's call it just app table, and extend it multiple times in the same app. And it's also true to various other extensions in other apps. For example, a vendor table can be extended, and it's also just one additional table here. It's called ext. So this is our companion table. And it enables us to do this, what I'm about to show you in the introduction. So let's consider we have an app. And of course, the app is eventually getting added some objects within it. So in this case, just a table object. We want to add some fields so like we can store data in it. And as we grow, we might end up with requirements that does not really fit into that table. So we really want to store this data, but it does not really belong here. So we might just think all the time, okay, but this is a separate context. It's still on one object, but we cannot really separate it unless we would create a new app for that. But that comes with some additional overhead. So, and what we were introduced now is the possibility to add this extension right away in the same app. And it allows us to separate this context within the same app. So we no longer have this table extension or this field put inside any other separate app. Do this on our app. And believe it or not, this is something we see throughout the base application as of today. And Microsoft put it one additional thing to that, and that are the namespaces. So we can see that the main context here is the sales, from a sales perspective. And we still speak about one and only one thing, and it is the customer. So the customer has two separate contexts. One is, basically the sales, and another additional is the service. Right, so why bother about this? Why not place it in a different app right away? Well, we have to consider that it may take some time, and the foreseeable future could be that we do this in the long run. It could be a thing. So, and the question here is whether we go with only one app or the multi-app approach. And this is basically the question of today's session. So let's be clear about some of these terms. And let's start with the microservices by a quote by Martin Fowler, and goes like, you shouldn't start a new project with microservices, even if you're sure your application will be big enough to make it worthwhile. A pretty heavy statement. I was on that side for a long time. But what really is a microservice in perspective of AL? So a typical microservice, you have one database per service, and the microservices are typically connected over the network to communicate with each other. And a more main topic here of today's session is the deployable units. We have multiple deployable units that have to work so that everything works together. Some of them might be isolated, but you can see these boundaries are not so strict. But the term microservice does not really belong here. So I would just coin it to multiple app, because we still end up having one database and one database only, and they are also not connected via network. So it's basically about the multiple deployable units for now. And also there are some dependencies we could rely on, that they are not, that the internals are not visible to the rest of the code. But yeah. So what is a monolith? And I picked up most of these from another session from DC Tech Days not too long ago. I think it was 2022. So it's easier in the short term, but harder to maintain in the long term, because everything is basically interfering with all the other components. There are not strict boundaries. Everything is, you can see that in the diagram already. Like these blue rectangles, they're not visible anymore. Like in the middle one, it's not even visible anymore. Everything is too much connected with each other. So ultimately hard to read, hard to maintain, and of course, slow to compile, slow for code codes, and so on and so forth. But again, it is one deployable unit, and it has one database. So in comparison, what about a modular monolith instead? So it has the benefits, or should have the benefits, of the multi-app architecture, and it's only one single deployable unit. It is separated by specific features, so it has its clear contexts if they are separated well, and basically can transform into any in an own app, and might be a considerable approach. So let's compare them all together, all along, one more time. And whether you're starting out just now on the AL journey, you won't start with a monolith, really. What you're aiming for is a modular monolith. Putting that into perspective, if it is from the history, from the past, that you migrated from CAL, chances are that based on what we are given from technology perspective, we'll have a more likely a monolith that could now transfer with a single step in between the modular approach into those multiple apps. So you don't really have to go there instantly. So there's a blog post by Marie Brummel, which I highly recommend you to read. And it also gave me some very good, nice insights. Also for this post by Uncle Bob Martin. And it really states that the difference between monoliths and services, in this case, our multiple apps, is not architectural. It is more a difference in deployment strategy. So instead of having all these different apps that we have to deploy, we would get rid of the complexity by just going with a monolith, but with all the benefits from the modularization perspective of a multi-app approach. Now, how can we do that? Namespaces. So namespaces allow us to do a couple of things here. So they support better code organization. So it's logical grouping and also maintenance in the long run. They're essentially just a prefix to the object name. You can see it like that. And they have unique, or enable us to define unique object names to avoid identifier conflicts. But this is not applicable to our own one app approach. This only applies to multiple apps, unfortunately. I don't know if Microsoft will change it in the future, but this is for now. So to get the most out of the namespaces, to avoid identifier conflicts within your own code space, you need to create a new app for that. So let me ask you this question. If you would start out on your AL journey from scratch without knowing anything, perhaps maybe some other programming languages, where do you start? Like, where do you structure, how do you structure your project, really? So I searched, and the only thing I found on the documentation, correct me on this one if I'm wrong, is this one, extension structure. And all we've got to focus is right now this one. This little part that is containing like the information, grouping objects based on their functionality, which can help maintain a large project easier. Let me just quickly show one of my other windows here. I have to see what I'm doing here. Now, putting that into perspective, logical grouping. Is it a somewhat more layered architecture that we are following here? Putting every object by its object name in a folder? Perhaps you can think like, okay, this is good. I want to structure it that way, but I want to have a certain modular thinking here. And then again, you will end up with all these different object names. It's not going to show you what is going on inside this module. And then we have also functionality per module, which is going to be addressed right now in the namespace, which I have prepared a demo for. So if we would come up with this, and by the way, this is a script that I have from the official Microsoft documentation, is having this original and this edited. So the way this was, or is stated, is that it applies a CSV file. So we enter a folder name and we say, okay, this is the namespace for this folder. So every file in this folder gets the namespace applied to it. And from the folders which I have just shown, what about seeing what is going on in this app right now? So we have a structure. We can see there's our exams. So we have scenarios. We have students. Why is scenario red? Oh, okay. We have tasks inside that. Oh, that's interesting. Tasks. Oh, it's red. So, okay, it's coming from the base app. Now I see. We cannot really. So this is the namespace, the object name conflict that I was speaking about. And to be able to still use that name, we can, and this is what I briefly created here, you use a script or whatever you like to apply the namespaces based on the folder name. So already we can see that the namespaces follow the approach of our folder names, or folder structure rather. So if we would apply this, okay, so let me quickly show you what it looks like in the Explorer. There's no namespace for this module. If we apply the script, hopefully should have worked. It is now a bit more categorized. Probably I need to reload my window as it's not showing what I was hoping for. Okay, this looks much better. And now we can already see that this is a nice logical grouping of some of the parts within our module. By the way, this is just an app. It's called like what, Educator. And you can already tell that this is a separate context. So how does Microsoft do it then? Okay, this is just what we have seen so far with the Educator app. And this is how Microsoft does it. They're also following this approach of having folders named as the namespace, or rather vice versa, the namespace named as the folder. We can definitely sort things out. There's a session by them. I definitely recommend you watching this because they go far and beyond on what I just show you. It's much more in-depth. And one thing I'd like to mention real quick is the fact that we are not able to rename these namespaces. So be careful if you implement them. Yes, they enable us to do like a lot of logical grouping here. So you see up front how these namespaces are applied to the object, and then with all the using statements that are importing other objects or other namespaces rather, we can already tell what the dependencies are to other modules or namespaces in that regard in one app. So if we would step one step further and think about modular monoliths for what essentially we do all the time, if we would start on a new project, we'll end up with source control management system like Git, for example. And one misconception here is that the monorepo equals a monolith. So let's take that into perspective. How does this process look like? So we clone a repository because we want to work on or develop on a new app or an app that was given to us. And we compile this. First, we obviously need some symbols. And for reasoning of this demo, yes, there is the test app, but we'll spare that out. We say like, okay, this is just one artifact. We'll give it a go. So what we will end up with the multi-app strategy is we are having multiple artifacts. And perhaps these are more bound together than this isolated concept. Perhaps there are dependencies, one app cannot deal with the other, without the other. So where does the monorepo come into place? So instead of having these separated repositories, we can only have one repository and put everything inside of that. The question is, why would you do that? So perhaps if you would think about refactoring or uptaking certain technical features, what I'm going to show here is yet another demo which I prepared. These are 3 dependent apps, one way or the other. These are also 3 different repositories. They are not remote, they are just local for demo purposes. And inside of that, we can see, okay, there's a tooltip on a page field. For those of you who don't know yet, there is the possibility to convert this into a tooltip on a table field. So let's do this right now. But you can already tell that if we were to do this in the whole application, we would need to uptake this in each and every repository, which we can do now. But you can already, on top of your head, think that this might take some time to get through. Because ultimately, in the background, we would push these and some sort of pull request mechanism comes into mind or comes into enforcement that we have to create because we have a branching strategy that does not allow us to push into the main branch directly, hopefully. If not, this is highly recommended. Now, with all the different changes, you can already tell, okay, we have to create a new branch, created a nice little extension. It's not doing so many things. It's just PowerShell executing Git commands. So on multiple repositories that are opened within this multi-root workspace in VS Code. So we end up with whatever, a branch name feature / dash tooltip. And now these are our changes. Probably I have to uptake them, stage them. And let me see if this script does it for me. And we can say, okay, convert tooltip. Now, it doesn't go further than that, unfortunately, because I have no command for pushing that. But all the commits are now added to the repositories. So where does the Monorepo come into place? Instead of having to commit for each and every repository, because we only want to do one thing, really, is the benefit that we have cross-project refactoring with an atomic commit. It's also much easier for new developers to set it up. It's just one clone command, which we have to execute. It also has an easier dependency management, eliminating the dependency hell, because everything is just one version, should be. Otherwise, we couldn't still do it in, or should be doing it in a separate repository. And easier collaboration, as everyone can see what else the code looks like in each and every repository. It does come with some downsides. You have to embrace the trunk-based development. Basically, it means that the feature branches don't live too long enough. So you will not end up with too many merge conflicts. You have to consider all the large scale changes. So put that into your mind that if you were to do what I just showed now, there might be some conflicts within the translation in some apps that you don't want to be in there. And the builds can be more complex. And obviously the increased repository size, but if you put everything in perspective and sum it all up, we will end up with the same size. But it's just stuffed in one repository. So the clone over the course of the years can be taking some time. And don't forget about the multi-root workspace capability of your IDE. Just because we put everything in one repository, it's not going to do too much. We are still able to open one single app and develop in that, but we still have these advantages of having everything inside just one repository. In the end, it's not only about technology. There's the so-called Conway's law, and it states that any organization that designs a system will produce a design whose structure is a copy of the organization's communication structure. So taking that in, is it really a matter of who owns the code? Don't we own the code all in the company? So that is also something that we have to consider doing the Monorepo style. And putting that even more into perspective, the underlying concept here is the ownership that we have to clarify very strictly, even documented on the root folder of your repository. So for these different areas, so payment, purchase, and support, you can already tell that in a monorepo, everyone can do everything, right? So we just clone it, we have all the rights, push it. Now, obviously, there comes what I just mentioned, the pull request mechanism into place, which can then be edited even further to just apply on certain folders. So you can, for each and every app, add a new viewer policy in the likes of Azure DevOps, and corresponding to that on the GitHub, which is highly favored by Microsoft, we have the code owners file, and everything is put into that. So that leads us to some monorepo examples, finding on GitHub. So the Business Central apps repository is still, I believe, in the pilot. Yes, it is. You can see that on the lock icon. It's very small on top. But there is the BC apps, which also includes the business foundation layer. So if you're interested in that, you can definitely look that up. And by the way, if you're about to use ALGO for GitHub, so kind of DevOps tool that Microsoft provides us with, this is also the standard. By default, you define the projects based on the folder name inside of that repository. I don't know whether there is the option to separate it in a new repository, but I think you will end up doing a new repository and going from there. So with all the new apps that we might come up with, as Microsoft does it as well, because it's separating it nicely. So you don't have all the internals visible to each other. That might be a new hope. And it's the handling of dependencies in the package manager. So if you're familiar with other programming languages like Python, Java, or Node.js, you might have heard of some of these. I forgot to mention .NET development. That is NuGet already. So we have NPM, Gradle, pip. And something that occurs not too long ago is something that is being tested right now. And it's the package manager capability for AL. It's put inside the NuGet. And Camille and Freddie are going into much more detail about this topic in the BC Tech Days session this year, which I highly recommend you to watch. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but I just briefly want to mention here is the VS Code extension. That is the L NuGet helper by Patrick Schiefer. And I just showed a screenshot here that is going to execute the command. And what you can see inside the AL packages folder, these symbols are not downloaded from the Docker container or any instance of Business Central. these are downloaded by the NuGet feeds from Microsoft. Still in testing stage, I think. Haven't heard otherwise. But it's also had to be taken into consideration if we would develop our DevOps pipelines. So there's a blog post by Patrick Schiefer as well. Definitely you can look that up as well. Moving fields. Now, taking everything into one perspective, what Microsoft has been doing is moving fields from one app to another. And that is, of course, the number series app, which you probably have heard about. And this is going to show how we, or they, obsoleted some of these fields. And let me quickly show you this code again. What we can see here is only one table, and this field, we want to remove that in the long run. Not really remove, we want to move it. This is a new possibility to do that in the same app. So what we can come up with is we can create a new table extension object, say that this is obsoleted because it is moving into another app. Oh, so this is right now, unfortunately, not available for us. It's exclusively accessible to Microsoft and select publishers. So it's being investigated and tested heavily on. So they're making sure that this feature does work correctly. So just to give you a short introduction here, we can come up with a sneaky plan of saying that we're Microsoft now, and it gets away. Now that this is moved to another app, which we have defined here in the move to property, we can come up with in a new app and say, all right, so this is now added to a new app. And this is an error. Probably I should have worked this out. If we set this to moved, then of course it's taking into account. There is more to it, as this was just uptaking it to another app. So these properties are much more in depth with a much better demo explained by Microsoft in a full-blown session, also from BC Tech Days this year. So if you're a coffee enjoyer, you might also like this app approach or this app demo. So definitely you can check that out if you'd like to. But now the time has not really come. We still end up with not this possibility right now. So is it enough? Will it be enough for us to consider going into one app only? So let's wrap this up. If you want to sell your apps on the App Stores, you still have to do this on a separate app. There is no other way around it, as this is something that is defined as an offering app, or not really, it's not a general term. I picked this up from Baldo's blog post not too long ago, and he coined that essentially all it is, there's no object inside of this app. This is also what the base app is all about. There are no objects inside the base app. The base app manifest app.json only imports or has a dependency on the other parts, for instance, system application. And the extension extension or folder structure first has to be taken into account. So you can start with that right now. Optional are namespaces. So first start with the folder structure, nice and clear. So you can move parts around if you haven't already done that. And then optional namespaces, because once you apply them to your project, and it's really has to be taken carefully into account that you're stuck with them. And also you have to define all the other namespaces. So if you apply a namespace and there are dependencies who did not implement namespaces right now, you will end up with breaking changes if they were to uptake on namespaces. This comes with a new opportunity for us so that we can build and prepare our PTEs. So separate the logic into extension objects that you are prepared for whenever that might be. Whenever you might say, okay, well, this is a nice module. I want to offer that on various other customers. So I isolated that I want to do this as an offer on the app source. You can definitely see this as an opportunity right now to prepare your solutions. And then we also discussed the monorepo. It's not equal a monolith. And it's not really about technology only. Think about more of the people. It's more of a cultural thing that you have to take into account. So get along with feedback. Feedback loops might help to deliver the best work of the people. Because in the end, it's nice and clear that we have to become really good at developing against a moving target that is going to break a lot of things in the future. There's no other way around it. And if you were to be inspired by this session or interested in us on how you can handle that in a certain way with the multi-app approach, I'd highly recommend you to watch the session from 2 years ago, the multi-application architecture by Kamil Sacek and Jeremy Riska. They are addressing much more and also provide some numbers alongside productivity and how easy it can be to just extract by installing or uninstalling apps along the go in an environment. So we're at the end of the session. I'd like to thank you for your attention. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Yeah, there are a couple of questions, and thank you very much. Very smoothly, nicely explained, Christian. You mentioned Camille a couple of times. He's here too, and he has a question, or actually a note. There was a question, by the way. I'll read out the question, and I think you answered it with the wrap-up slide. Can you explain more if you see the monorepo and modular monolith as solutions for PTEs and or app source apps? I see it as PTE area thing rather than app source and reusable modules. I guess you, as I said, already answered it with the wrap-up slide, but maybe you want to elaborate on it.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I have an answer already, but I'm a bit disappointed that I deleted one of the slides. Let me just, I have no idea how I switch to certain slides, but sorry, but I have to get here eventually. And there's a link I have not mentioned. It's the Monorepo tools. And they also describe in much more detail how certain features work. And they introduce the polyrepo style of things first. And eventually there comes a diagram. I really want to show this, so bear with me. Just open another tab. Yeah, so one of the diagrams shows what I really want to answer here to this question, and it's this kind of graph. So what you're just questioning is this a PTE or more app source relevant topic? And same goes with this modular or this open source projects. Well, it's not really open source, but what I see is that there are multiple like VS Code extensions, taking into account what I just saw, what I just presented to you, also a VS Code extension. It is just there for single purpose. And to that regard, a monorepo doesn't really make sense for app source apps. So we are more on the style of what Google and Microsoft and Facebook have on top of left. So yes, it's more, the monorepo does fit more into the PTE world instead of this app source kind of world.
Clear. Camille made a note on NuGet regarding the NuGet. There is new extension ALGet, which mimics C# NuGet package management, including GUI, as a note here. Wow.
Yes, perfect. Thanks. That's also why on this one slide there was an extensions. Unfortunately, I haven't had time to go into too much details on that, but I've seen that, and unfortunately I wasn't able to present it today because I think it was released like a couple of days or weeks ago. Yeah, but it's a very good mention. I highly also recommend to see that through. Yep.
Then I have a small question myself. You said be careful with namespaces to implement them because you can't change it anymore. Is that, let's say, a temporary thing, or is it projected somewhere, or might be that later on? I mean, AL evolves always in some stages, that it later on will be possible, or is it a thing that will always be the case with namespaces? You set it and you can't change it anymore.
I wasn't there on the session. I just watched it via YouTube. So if there are any details like behind the scenes, I don't know that. And I also haven't heard anything else. But I think that is something that needs to be worked on. I don't have any official statements or infos on whether that is already the case.
Okay. Then these are all the questions, but some nice remarks from Monica. Very good sessions. Thank you very much. David Singleton, great presentation, Christian. Great to see a solid use case for namespaces with a well-explained example. And Gert mentioned on a certain point that the link is on the slide. So nicely on time, and all compliments for your first presentation. We would say hats up. So thank you very much. I'm going to switch to my side.
Yeah, thank you very much also for the responses there.
Yeah.
And also the question.
Yeah.
Really nice to see the community moving forward as we are all sitting in the same boat. So we are thriving through feedback, and only together we can win. I think there's also a hashtag on X right now.
Yes, by
Definitely
the way, two other comments, one from Camille also. Thanks for this presentation. I'm happy that there is someone else looking into the architecture and all around. So a nice compliment. And from Luc Buscher, thank you for the clear explanation. So I think too it was clear and well done. So we're going to round up. Thank you all for being here. And of course, in the first place, you, Christian, but everybody else. And yes, thanks for putting in questions. And hope to see you in, what will it be, 2 weeks' time with the next session. We're going to close up. Thank you, everybody, for being here.